So welcome, everyone. We have all of our panelists here, and I know people may be joining us as we go on, or they may come on to Facebook Live, which would be wonderful that we could serve the community in a little bit more of an extended way. But as we start, I just wanted to just take a moment, and I went ahead and lit my candle. It's back here because I thought I might fumble around and I didn't want to set my computer on fire. But in all seriousness, many of you know that today, October 15th, is in fact Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. And this whole month we do set aside to honor the little ones whom we have lost. So it happens to be, I did not plan this, but October 15th, 2000, 20 years ago, my father-in-law went to heaven after a battle with cancer. And 3 days later, his first grandchild was born. So this day has significance for the Jacobson family as well. We have also lost 2 babies in early miscarriages. So I feel the weight of this topic in a different way than our panelists do, for sure. But I know that if you're listening to this topic touches you in some way, whether personally or a close friend or family member. And so I want to honor the little warriors and princesses that we have lost. And I thought we would just take a moment, a minute or so, and just have a moment of silence. I'm a praying person, so I will say a prayer in my heart. And let's just take a moment to honor those that we've lost. We have decided that our panelists are going to share in age order. And so our first panelist is Julie Kaser, whom I was just recently introduced to. We just spoke for the first time this evening. So I look forward, Julie, to hearing the story about your sweet Oscar. And I'm just going to turn it right over to you. You share with us what's on your heart.
Just to show, this is that's a little, here, you can put him here. This is Oscar. Oscar, we found out about him. Originally, he was actually supposed to be a girl. We went in around our 14-week to find out his gender, and they misdiagnosed him. And at that time, they ended up, or misgendered or whatever. At that time, we went to, sorry, I'm a little fumbly. We went to like a baby place where they just tell you the gender. And when we went there, they ended up calling my OB and just saying, we're seeing some things that don't look quite right. So we ended up going to our OB, and they said, the baby looks like he has a cleft palate and some heart deformities. And so we got transferred to specialists, maternal fetal medicine. And, in August, 3 years ago, that's kind of where our journey began with Oscar. And we were very fortunate. All through the fall, we kind of just prepared for him, and we were planning to do whatever was needed to keep him here with us. And around this time, I think 3 years ago, we were visiting Mott's and U of M in Ann Arbor, Michigan to see, because that's where Oscar might have gone for heart surgery, or down to Nationwide Children's Hospital for his heart surgery. And then to move along a little farther, Oscar was born November 18th, 2017, the day before his older brother's birthday. So it's kind of a little bittersweet. We celebrate Oscar's birth, and then his older brother, Theodore, turned 3 that day after. It was kind of, Oscar came suddenly. He was 4.5 weeks early. And just a surprise, we went in, and the midwife said, "Oh, we feel a foot." And I went in for emergency C-section at 1:30 in the morning, and he was born. Fortunately, our OB was on call, which was nice, because our doctors, or the MF doctor says, if any night you don't want to go into the hospital, it's Friday night, because it's just, everybody's getting off work that week. Just don't come on a Friday night if you can avoid it. And that's when we were there. We went in at like 11 p.m. on a Friday night. And Oscar was born at 1:30 in the morning, and 1:35 actually. And it was very intense and very scary. I felt bad for my husband because he went with Oscar, and I think it was just overwhelming for him to be with just nurses and doctors and this little baby that has all these tubes hooked up to him. And I was in recovery for the C-section. And we started the NICU life right then. About 4 or 5 hours after, or they brought Oscar in to see me right before he went up to the NICU. And then I think around 9 a.m. I got to go up and see him after my C-section, and we just kind of lived the NICU life for 29 days with him. There were a lot of days of really good time and not so good time. He ended up getting off the ventilator after about 10 days, and we had a week where he was just on tube feed, which was wonderful because it was like, oh, this is like a real little baby. We don't have to have assistants getting to hold him. We don't have to have all this extra stuff. So those, 7 days that we had where we just got to hold him like a regular baby was amazing. And it was nice too, because other people got to hold him too. The few family members, grandma and grandpa and his little brother, or older brother, I guess, but he seemed little at that time. And then Oscar, I wouldn't say suddenly took a turn for worse. As I go back through and I look at his life during that 29 days, he was having a hard time with his feeds. His sugar levels just kept being off. And it was just like one night he kept throwing up, and they had to reintubate him twice. And it was just really rough. And I stayed with Oscar all the time, and my husband had to come up that night to be with them too. And we didn't know it was the end at that time, but it was. And they were going to put in a PICC line and do some other different things. And it was kind of like Oscar just left us very suddenly. I just, right now in my mind, I'm picturing the pictures of that time. And I think after he was gone, I think the hardest thing was just like living that first year without him. Just because it's like we left the hospital and we didn't have a baby with us, and our life was prepared. We were prepared to change and to do all the things needed, all the medical needs, all the doctor's appointments, all the therapies. And I know our life would look very different than it does now, but I wish we got to do that for him. And he has 2 cousins that are born in the same year as him. And so it's always hard to see those, my nephews, because I always think, oh, we're missing our Oscar, and we have our other 2 nephews there. But I think now the biggest thing for us is just continuing Oscar's story, and just sharing him with you guys today, and sharing him with others, and just continuing to remember him. So.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. It was nice getting to meet Oscar a little bit through your story, and thank you for sharing his picture too. Our next panelist is Jamila Washington, and I need to find her here so I can pin her. There we go, so you can see her lovely face and hear her story about her baby Q.
Hi, Jamila Washington. I meant to have the picture, but I just quickly got home in time for this panel. But my son lived for 3 months and 2 days. 2 of those months was spent at the NICU. And we found out at about, I guess, that 20-week, anatomy scan that there was something wrong. And this was my first baby, but this was my husband has 2 older kids. And so this was his 3rd. And so I had no idea that our ultrasound appointment was taking a long time. I thought it was really cool because I get to see all him moving around. I was like, oh, look at him and stuff. And, I wasn't even alarmed that a doctor came in to look at the scans and all this. And so we had that appointment, I think, on a Thursday. And that Saturday, I had planned a gender reveal party. And so that Thursday, we go to the doctor, my OB, to talk about the scan. And that's when she tells us we think there's something wrong. We're not sure. We recommend you get an amnio and all of that. And so, that Sunday, I refused to cancel my gender reveal party. I had my party and nobody knew except for my mom and my husband what we were going through. And then that next week is when we got the diagnosis that he had trisomy 18, and going through all the doctor's appointments and just ready to fight, just like Julie said, I'm prepared, I'm going to do this. And he was supposed to come December 6th, and he ended up coming November 15th, 2016. And I went to my OB on Friday and my blood pressure was up, and she's like, I have an opening on Monday, so you're having your baby. And I was like, great. And I had already planned to do the C-section, and so we didn't know, just from the ultrasounds, they kind of told us some of the issues that they were seeing. He had a VSD, just had the clubbed hands and, the small mouth, and that's all we knew. We had already met with the NICU staff. And so we were blessed that the neonatologist that we met with was there that day. So we had a familiar face there. And since it was already scheduled, I had my doctor there to deliver. And for me, like when we were in the OR, they were like, oh, if you want some music, what kind of music? And I was like, can we have Christian music? I need positive vibes here. And so we were able to have Christian music playing. So that was just really awesome. And then, and I was glad that we had already met with the neonatologist to know kind of what to expect at delivery. And so they did all what they needed to do. And I was blessed they wheeled him by me before they took him out to finish doing all the tests. And I got to see him and I was like, you made it, you're here. And I was just super excited about that. And I used to not be a crier until I had him. And now I'm just a crybaby. And so we got, his first nurse was just amazing. She ended up becoming one of his primary nurses. And then we had great nighttime primary nurses. I mean, just our whole NICU stay was amazing. And then he was doing so well in the hospital that they even retested him to see if maybe he's mosaic, maybe he doesn't have full T18. And because the only thing that was stopping him was just to get him to breathe. And it was just he had to gain some weight, it seemed like. And so we were, after 2 months, we got discharged. I probably am one of the few babies who got discharged directly out of the level 3 NICU instead of going down to level 2 and then phasing out. They were like, you've been here so long, your nurses will probably kill us if they don't get to say goodbye. So we got to do everything there. So we came home, we started the whole, therapy, having, I had a nurse that would come 3 times a week just to check his, progress, if he's still gaining weight and all that. We had done the hearing check. We did had the speech therapist, the physical therapist. We were starting it. He was going to the heart doctor, and we lucked out that the heart doctor that was seeing him in the hospital was had a location that they were seeing clinics that was just 2 miles from our house, and we could go there. So I was like, oh God, you are working everything out. This is just perfect. And my dad had recently retired, and so he was going to watch him while I go back to work, and he was going to learn how to do all this stuff. So I was like, oh, this is just a perfect plan. And then we were actually getting ready to start the process of him having his heart repaired. And then one day he was breathing a little funny. And I was just like, my husband kind of was like, I don't know if it's something. And I was like, well, this is how he kind of normally sounds, so I don't know. And so we went to bed that night, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night, just like, oh, he's sleeping and he's making all his little rattle noises like he normally did. And I just rocked him and just prayed over him, put him down the next morning. He was still kind of breathing. So I was like, you know what? Let me call this pediatrician. And so I called the pediatrician as soon as they opened, and they were like, can you get here right now? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, I'm thinking, I don't know what the rush is, but I'll take them. And so my mom was like, well, I'm going to go with you, because she went to every doctor's appointment with me. And so we get to, we drive, and she was like, he's quiet. I was like, oh, he's probably sleeping because it's kind of his morning nap time. And so we get to the doctor's office, and I mean, like, by the time I said I'm here, they were like, oh, you can come on back. We're back there, and the nurse was like, so what kind of sound? I was like, well, I don't hear the noise now. And we looked, and he wasn't breathing. And so somewhere between my house and the pediatrician office, he passed away. One of my prayers was, God, don't make me have to make that decision to say whether he lived or died. So I was kind of happy that it was peaceful and quick. I say quick. They did try to do CPR, called the ambulance. We rushed to the emergency room. We were there. I mean, it's not fun seeing them try to revive your child because they have to take extreme measures. And sorry for crying. So yeah, it was 2 days after Valentine's Day that he passed away. Not 2 days after 3 days after Valentine's Day. I was just happy that he got to see a Super Bowl game. He got to do Valentine's Day. He got to do Christmas. He was alive for my birthday, which was in December. He, got to see my parents' anniversary is Valentine's Day, so he was there for that. And it was just, I was just like, like watching them, and I was just at the point where I was like, okay, God, I guess, I've enjoyed 3 months. I enjoyed every moment of it. I guess it wasn't meant to be. So I will, I just have to let it go, let him go, and, just long for heaven all the more. And, but what was really sweet is just that in his life, I wasn't quiet about my grief. I had a Facebook page where I shared about what I was feeling. There were some days where I did not want to get up. But I had 2 stepkids living with me full time that were wanting to do stuff. And I dealt with anger with that because I was like, why am I raising other people's kids and not able to raise my own? I guess that was in February that he passed away, February of 2017. And then June of 2017, God made it where I had to go out of town for work. And I ended up being out of town back to back. Normally I'm only gone a week at a time, but I was gone. I was gone a week, came home a weekend, and everybody had there was a father-son retreat at our church that my husband had left, and my stepdaughter was at her mom's. So I had that weekend all to myself. And then by the time everybody got back, I was gone again. And during that 2 weeks, God dealt with me and all my anger. And I was able to come to terms and grips with, this is my life, this is my story. Also in the process of that, with my job, I train a lot of my coworkers. So a lot had heard through the grapevine. So whenever I had to do a class, I would just be upfront and just tell them, so that I was like, there's no need to be embarrassed or ashamed about what happened and what I went through. And even in doing that, I mean, there were so many of my coworkers who would come up to me when we had breaks in our class to tell me they either lost a child or they had gone through something, and they were just like, I'm just so glad to see you smiling and to share your story so openly and not, just let people wonder what's going on. And actually today I was talking to a coworker and she was like, so how are you doing? And I was like, we have moments and stuff. And I was blessed that my husband and I don't know where we got this wisdom, but we were both able to let each other grieve in our own way and not get super mad at each other for not grieving like I want you to grieve. My husband internalizes a lot and I'm more vocal and expressive and stuff. And so, I needed that Facebook page to share and to tell people the struggles and, celebrating every year. And thankfully my coworkers were supportive of that, because it was like the 15th through the 17th of every month that first year, because the 15th would have been the anniversary of his birth, the 17th the anniversary of his death. I just couldn't. I was just like looking at the calendar, making sure it was a weekend or something. So, or I was just taking off from work. I was like, I just can't function. But after the first year went by, life got better. About a year and a half after he died, I had another kid, and that was a blessing. I have Tegan now. He's 2 years old, and I will say that having baby Q first has made me really appreciate Tegan's life and seeing him grow and develop. And these are all things I didn't get to experience with my first, but now I feel like I'm more patient, more appreciative, because I know it's fleeting and I know it's, it's just something people would take for granted, I mean, people tell you, oh, don't wish that time away, but I really, truly am blessed that God is letting me have this experience still. And it's been I see the world differently now. When I hear people, experiencing loss in their family, I'm not quick to say, oh, here's my condolences. It's like I really stop and I'm like, I remember just the emotions I felt, and sometimes I can't even comment because it's just too much. And because I remember I was like, you know what, my son just died a few hours ago and everybody is still going on with their lives like nothing has happened. And it's like, that's not right. The world is supposed to stop right now. And I know that's how other people feel when they lose somebody very important. So now I have that empathy, and that's how that, his life and death has changed me to now to be, have more of a feeling in regards to losing somebody that you do cherish and love. I am I'm glad that me and my husband, we came up with this thing, like we have baby Q moments where something will remind us of him and we'll say, oh, I had a baby Q moment. We probably don't have them as much as we did at the very beginning or mention them to each other as often, but I'm glad that we've made our house where we can still talk about them. The stepkids talk about them, we're like, remember when this happened or remember that? And so I have after it took me about a year after he died to make a photo book of his life. And I mean, it was hard to do because I was like, get like 3 pictures together and be like crying, okay, we got to start back tomorrow and stuff. But I have it on in our living room right now. It's under it's on our entertainment center. When Tegan gets to be not so destructive and tear the pages, we'll put it back on the coffee table. But I want it there so people can know we do have this son, and he's there to they can read his story if they're not wanting to come and ask me. And I've had where I've put his picture as my background when I'm teaching. And I did like when it was Trisomy Awareness Day or that month where I had that picture when I talked about it. And like one girl at work, she's like, I know I'm supposed to be paying attention to what you're teaching. She goes, but I was Googling what is Trisomy, and I got to educate. So I see it as it's just been like a whole big ball of emotions and things to go through with just experiencing this whole process and everything. And sometimes I'm wondering if I'm weird because I'm not stuck back 3.5 years ago. I, I've come to terms. I do visit his grave. I'll drive by because it's on the way home from my son's babysitter's house, and I just take a slight detour. But I'm not living there, and I'm thankful for that. That I'm taking the good that came out of that, because I didn't want to come out of this bitter and angry and jaded. I did want to come out, okay, God, there is a purpose for this. I may not see it all. I may only see small bits of it, but I will say this has made me long for heaven all the more. And so I feel like I've talked too much, but that's my life, getting the diagnosis of death and, living life after. So I can't wait till I can really tell my 2-year-old about his older brother. Thank you for letting me share and cry.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You were one of my first connections from the trisomy realm. And you and baby Q are special to Verity and me, because I was pregnant with Verity when I learned about you going home from the hospital, and that was exciting to see someone kind of close to our time frame going home. And so our connection goes back, and I've followed baby Q's group as well, and that takes me to Lisa Reed, because that's how we got connected, was her sweet case and the beautiful group that she has still going. And I'm just in awe of you, Lisa. And I know this has been a hard journey, but like Jamila, you have shown joy despite the grief. And so we would love to hear about your sweet case.
I'm already crying. I think this is Case. And sorry. A year past his passing, we found out, similar to all the others, that, the routine checks, because I was old when I had him. I just went to the fraternal medicine just because I was older. I think I was 41 when I had him, or 42. But they noticed a couple things, like his heart wasn't good, and they thought he had an extra digit. Well, it turns out he did. And so we went back another meeting and ultrasound and stuff like that. And of course, they led into the, have an abortion, terminate your pregnancy. And we finally said, we want to go to OHSU, which was a hospital the other direction from where we live, about an hour and a half away. And we ended up getting transferred there. And so we would just make the hour and a half drive for our appointments. And every time they did ultrasounds, they said, your son is doing amazing, all this good stuff. And so they said they wanted us to be there. So we took our RV up to the hospital, and we had been seeing the cardiologist up there, and they had this big meeting where they talked to his main cardiologist, had a talk with the surgeons, and they all agreed that they would do surgery on him after he was born if he needed it, when the time came. So that was really exciting. We're like, we have a team that's on board for care. And then he was originally diagnosed with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, and then it became a less severe case. And so that was really good news. We just kept getting good news the whole time. Anyway, so we went up and camped on the campus of the hospital 2 weeks before I was due. And a week before I was due, I started having contractions and started having labor. And so we all went to the hospital, and I ended up getting an epidural just in case. They gave me the choice. They said, we don't know the condition of Case after he's born. You know, do you want to have the chance to hold him? And because if you had an emergency cesarean, we'd have to knock you completely out. And I was like, oh, I definitely want to hold my son, you know. So I had an epidural, so I was prepared if I had to have a cesarean. And ended up not needing one. He was born, came out crying, and kind of similar to, I think it was Jamila's husband, just they whisked the baby away, and my husband was with the baby and probably didn't know what the heck he was doing because it was his first child. But anyways, so that was really neat. They actually let me hold him before they took him away, and he was just so precious. But we stayed in the NICU for 3 weeks and then came home. Case was 2 when he passed away. So we had off and on visits in the hospital. We were there for 3 weeks, came home for 3 weeks, and then he started having like difficulty breathing. And we went to the Albany, where we were from, the ED there, and they sent us up to Dornbeckers, the hospital that's in Portland. And that was when he had his first real issue. They thought he had neck, where it's like his intestines were infected, and so they cut him off the food, and then he got better from that, and they said, you know, now it's a good time to do some repairs on his heart. So about a month and a half old, he had his first heart repair, and he did awesome. They went into the cath lab and did banded his pulmonary artery, and then actually that was, I can't remember which one was first. Anyways, they also like 3 weeks later, I think, they had open heart surgery, and they put a stent in his, I think I said that backwards. They did the stent in the cath lab. But anyways, so he had 2 major heart things done. And we went home after he healed. He did amazing. Several times I thought we were going to lose him because he was doing breath holding spells and just a bunch of stuff. And finally came home. We were home by Christmas, which was exciting. And then New Year's Day, he went back to the hospital. So we had, you know, in and out. Finally, they think he aspirated, and they promised that he would not go home without a G button. And he recovered from that really well, and they got us in for his G button, and they did a GJ because they didn't want him to aspirate. And once he had that GJ button put in, he was hospital free, like 15 months, nothing but amazing. He was doing so great, and he was getting ready to have his. He's kind of got this thing where his nose would turn blue, so his saps were going down a little bit, like on a consistent basis. Like his normal was 70 to 80, and it was like, okay, his nose is getting blue, and people were noticing. It was like, oh, because I'm just so used to it, you know, I thought everything was fine. And then I was like, oh yeah, his nose is blue in that picture, that kind of thing. So, and he was really monitored by his cardiologist, who absolutely adored him. But she had said, you know, we could wait for him to go into like an emergent situation, or we can do this surgery now when he's really healthy. And so we decided that it was a really good situation to go ahead and do his next surgery, which was the Glenn procedure. And I'm not sure if this is legit information, but from what I understand, he's the first trisomy 13 child to have a Glenn repair. I'm not sure, but don't quote me on that. But he rocked the surgery. He was sitting at 85. He was doing so good, and they were so excited, and they sent us to the going home floor. He was just doing amazing, and we got to the going home floor, and actually it was one of the volunteers that came down, and she said, his sternal wound was had a little weeping. And so they took us back up to the PICU, and he had an infection and he had a collapsed lung. And they opened him back up, did a chest clean out, and then his other lung collapsed. So it was just, the end of Kaser's life was really sad because, I mean, it would be sad no matter what, but he really, really did good after that surgery. And it's just, I just have to trust that it was God's timing. Like when I was pregnant with Case, I prayed to God, like, you have a plan. I will love him no matter how long we get. And so I just really have to trust that this is the way that his life was planned. And it's heartbreaking, but I'm choosing to see the good in it. So, anyways, and of course we all wish I feel like a friend said to me one time, if you would have had 5 years, you would have wanted 5 more. And that's exactly the truth. Like, no matter what the age, you always would have wanted more time. I don't think anybody's ever ready to lose their own child. So I'm just really trying to have grace and not question the timing. So that's my little guy's story. And I don't know, somehow it's going to give somebody the hope that they need. So thanks for letting us do this. I really, sorry, I'm crying.
No, sorry. You don't need to be sorry. Nobody needs to be sorry. This is hard. Thank you so much for sharing more. I didn't start following Case until I think that summer. And so he was in my prayers a lot, and I was always checking to see how he was doing and what was the update. And so I know it's been hard, and especially a recent anniversary. So thank you. We honor you. We're going to go to a dad. I'm really glad that we have Andrew Siebert here to share about his sweet Janessa. And to be honest, I don't even remember how I got connected with Andrew, but I'm really thankful that he is here to share his story, and I'm looking forward also to hearing more because I just know bits and pieces. So
thank you. It's always a privilege to be able to share about our daughter. A lot of our friends and family have heard a lot about her, and always there's new people too who don't know yet. Every life is special. We also had a miscarriage, I believe in the fall of 2011, so 9 years ago. So late September, October was a significant time for us. We're not sure if it was 1 or 2 babies that we lost. And then a year later, I think, we became pregnant with Janessa. And in the spring, around 20 weeks of age, I think, 2022, something like that. Similarly, we had an ultrasound. They saw some things there that gave concern, and so they sent us for more intensive ultrasound in the city. And they took a long time for that, and we didn't. My wife was kind of concerned, and I'm like, no, they probably just couldn't get a good picture on the first one, And then a doctor came in and gave us the possible diagnosis for trisomy 18. It wasn't a conclusive diagnosis. There were some indications for trisomy 18 or trisomy 21, which would be Down syndrome. And they were encouraging abortion, termination, and that was not an option for us. She was already alive, and we were going to do the best we could for her. There was a lot of negativity, I would say, in the diagnosis, a lot of focus on the bad, the hard, the difficult road that would be ahead of us, as opposed to, you know, when somebody gets a cancer diagnosis or something, and well, you know, there's this much percentage chance of dying, but there's this much chance percentage of living, and we're going to focus on the living, and we're going to focus on what the medical system can do. It was more of the negative and the disappointing side of things. So that was very difficult, very difficult to share the news with our family, and then to walk through the rest of the pregnancy and still be seeking to enjoy the pregnancy and enjoy the different steps and the growth and preparing for this baby, but also recognizing she may not be born alive. And according to the statistics we were hearing, if she was born alive, very likely she would not live very long. So I remember talking with my father-in-law about, you know, life insurance, or like how would we pay for a funeral and stuff like that, and considering, you know, getting a coffin and stuff. And then I'm like, no, let's wait, let's give her a chance, let's see how long she lives, and then if we need to, we can plan for end of life. And we had appointments with cardiologists. We had a world very successful cardiologist recruited from another country here at our hospital, and she was also very negative. She told us if our daughter was born with trisomy 21, then heart surgery to repair her heart defects would be offered and available. If it turned out that she had trisomy 18, then no surgery would be given at our hospital. And she related some other negative outcome stories from other trisomy 18 families and said we've decided we're not going that route. So that put a lot of fear into us, I guess. Our big concern when she was born was, you know, treat her like any other child. If she needs treatment, treat her how you treat any other child. Don't withhold treatment just because of a diagnosis. She was born alive. She was breathing. She did need a little bit of oxygen, but didn't need intubation or anything significant. And then we stayed in the NICU for 2 weeks, and I think they're basically, well, why are we keeping you here? Like, there's nothing wrong. She's doing okay. Oxygen levels a little bit lower, but not significantly. So they sent us home with an NG tube and some oxygen tanks. And so she still had major heart problems, AVSD and double outlet right ventricle, and probability of pulmonary hypertension down the road if her heart problems weren't addressed soon enough. And so I started doing a lot of research. What are the chances of her survival with surgery? What are the chances without surgery? How can I convince our medical system to give the surgery that she needs, you know, if she's going to have a long-term chance at life? And we checked with different, we're from Canada in Alberta, and so we were checking with 3 other provinces to see if they would do the surgery, and they all refused. And so there was a chance of going to the US, but that's really expensive for Canadians. So it just, yeah, we didn't know what to do. We were praying, we were advocating. We weren't threatening lawsuits, but we were, you know, doing the best that we could to advocate for her respectfully and gently, I guess. Gently might not be quite the word for it, but and eventually we actually switched cardiologists to somebody that we thought would be have a better chance of helping. And it turned out that cardiologist was actually more against trisomy 18, trisomy 13 children and against treatment for them. And we couldn't believe, like, how did this happen? And he was also the head of the cardiology department. So not just a cardiologist, he's the head of the cardiology department here. Somehow God worked it out. We don't know what went on behind the scenes, but one of the surgeons said that he would be willing to do surgery if she got to a certain weight. And so we said, well, what weight would that be? And so the answer came back. And so we made plans for that, and we tried to get her to gain weight. She gained weight very slowly. But she was interacting with us, she was playing with us, interacting with relatives, grandparents, aunties, uncles, that kind of thing, playing with her toys, occasionally oral feeding. So a number of different milestones that were significant to us, and that we felt helped build our case for full treatment. I remember what Gloria Bosma shared, Brandon's mom, that when just after our daughter was born, she said, encourage them to treat the child, the individual, not the diagnosis. So that was what we tried to focus on for them. And at 8 months of age, they did give her the heart surgery. During the surgery, during the repair, they changed what they were going to do, asked for permission to do a different procedure. And that one didn't go well. She almost died that night. And so the next day or 2 days later, they did the full repair. And she did better with that. But from what we can tell, they had waited too long to do the repair. And so she did come out of the hospital with the pulmonary hypertension. So we had several months in hospital, very slow recovery. But we got to bring her home again. And we, had this hope that she would be with us for who knows how long. She lived almost 3.5 years. It was not an easy 3.5 years, number of times in hospital, and basically emergency room at home. She was on oxygen because of the pulmonary hypertension and quite a few medications, but just a big smile. Again, interacting with us. She couldn't talk, but she could sure make noises. And somebody in her family had an idea to put some chimes above her bed, and we had her on a table in our living room, so she was part of life. And these chimes above her bed, and we put a string on, and so she could ring the chimes, and that was really special for us. And she loved doing that. She loved playing a little piano. She would hit certain keys and certain rhythms and patterns. So we were just thankful for that. And then she got sick, and my wife and I didn't have agreement, should we go into the hospital or not? And this time we were both agreed, yes, we need to take her in. And so we took her in and got to the ER, and she coded just after getting into the room at the ER. And so we were just very thankful that we were at the hospital. They, as far as we can tell, they went all out to save her. And we even had a sister, my wife's sister, who was with us, 2 sisters, I think, 1 sister, and she was an EMT, and so she could kind of confirm, yes, she could ask questions, knowledgeable questions, and confirm, yes, they're not slow coding or withholding treatment. Her cardiologist, her 3rd cardiologist, we'd eventually switched to a 3rd one, and he cared about her. He came in and he was seeking to help, and then we found out that they had not been able to bring her back. So it was, in some ways, it was not surprising for how much oxygen and how much support she was needing, but in other ways, we had seen progress and improvement, and we thought she was making improvement. So it was surprising. So that was almost exactly 4 years ago, on November 9th, that'll be 4 years ago. So she's been gone now longer than she was with us. The grief and loss journey since then has not been easy, especially for my wife. And I forget who had shared that, husband and wife, we have different ways of grieving, and we need to recognize that and let the other spouse grieve in the way that they need to grieve. My wife has been more, I'll say, emotionally expressive, and the tears have come much more often to her. They come to me sometimes, especially in the first 1.5 years, I would say. Different things. I tried to be open to the grief and to the emotions, but I didn't feel it the same way my wife did. We've had a number of different counselors, some that are grief counselors, some that are trauma counselors, and another one, I forget who the other one was now, kind of 3 professional ones anyway, who have been helpful in different ways. The grief counselor had a good analogy with often for men or for less emotional spouses, it can be like different rooms in a house, and this is the room with grief, this is the room with work, this is the room with family, etc. And when I'm grieving, I go into that room, and then I come out and close the door and I go into the next room. And for my wife, it's more of an open room, open house concept, and all the rooms are open and together, and it's not separated into different compartments. And so that was a helpful thing for us to understand as a couple. We found that traveling was helpful. My wife enjoys traveling, and that has given her a lot of enjoyment and helps take her mind off of the grief and just things to look forward to. Nancy Guthrie has some good resources that were helpful. Somebody told us about grief retreats, and my wife wasn't ready to go until a year and a half after our daughter passed away. And we did go then. We think it was probably still too soon for her, but it was helpful to be with other people who understand the loss of a child in particular. It was for people who have experienced child loss. But it was also very hard to hear their stories and their grief and trauma and different things like that. So I think for us, the trauma has the various difficult things from our daughter's life and passing have been the hardest thing to deal with. There was a lot of grief, especially in the first year or two, but the trauma effects have lasted a lot longer and been difficult for my wife, especially. Just during our daughter's life, my wife's body was trained. When our daughter had trouble, when the alarms went off, she would jump right away and figure out what was wrong and what was needed to help, and where was the oxygen tube kinked or disconnected, somebody forgot to turn it on. Happened a few times. Actually, funny story for those from the hospital. We were in the hospital one time in the kind of the room between PICU and the regular ward, and we had a high flow machine, and a lot of the nurses and RTs hadn't seen a home high flow machine like that. So they were curious, what's this about, and looking at it, and we were explaining. And then they were over at the desk, and I accidentally turned the machine off. And of course, then our daughter's sats start to go down. So I turn it on as quickly as I could, and I'm just waiting and hoping the alarm won't go off, and they'll, then of course I won't look like a very credible parent. And it takes like a minute for it to turn back on. So I switched her to the tank in between, but then it's cold air and she didn't like the cold air. Anyway, thankfully it came back on, and it was all good, but that was just a funny story from the hospital. So yeah, grief and trauma recovery has been harder than we expected. We do believe that God has been very faithful to us. He hasn't made our road easy. He didn't heal our daughter down on this earth, but he has walked with us. He has been very faithful, and we believe that he loves us very much. So very thankful for that. Also thankful for our family and our friends who have supported us in different ways. So if you have any questions or anything, I don't mind sharing more, but I think that kind of sums it up a little bit. So thanks for letting me share.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew. That was great to hear more of your story, and I think helpful. My husband and I, he calls it waffle brain versus spaghetti brain. I have the spaghetti brain.
Yes, yep. So, I forgot I was going to show her a picture too. So
Here,
a picture of her. So
let me go back and spotlight you. So okay. There we go. There she is. Oh, sweet girl.
I'm sure how the reflection is, but yeah.
Beautiful girl.
Very special little girl. So
thank you. All right, I'm gonna jump over to spotlight Barb. So let me get her up on the screen. And for many in our Trisomy community, she needs no introduction. Barb Van Haraway. I learned how to say her last name, but I appreciate you. I know of all the journeys, yours has been the longest, and we certainly appreciate all you've done for our community, and we honor Stacy, and we look forward to hearing her story from you tonight.
Well, it's always good to share the story after you've lost your child, because it seems like so many people forget, and this is the community, I think, that helps keep me alive and keep me knowing that her life did matter, and it did. It's kind of hard to sum up almost 37 years, because Stacy was 3 weeks short of her 37th birthday when she passed away. Way back when, because, 37 years ago was a long time, even more so, it was 40 years ago. We didn't have all the technology. We did have ultrasounds, but back then it didn't show that there was anything going on. They just thought that she was small. So we just kind of went on with our pregnancy. Decided to deliver at our little small hometown hospital because there was no concerns that we knew of. So we did deliver at our hometown hospital. And she was like 4 pounds, 8.5 ounces. So pretty tiny, but my sister's kids had all been tiny. So there was nothing in my mind that said there was something wrong. I really didn't get to see her a whole lot. And back then it seemed like it was a day or so before they even brought her to me, and I had to ask for that. And that was because they were at that point trying to decide, was there something going on? And it was interesting because my cousin was one of the nurses in the hospital. So she was there also when they gave us the diagnosis and so forth, but they didn't give us the diagnosis then. You have to remember, back that long ago, they said, this is what we think, but you need to go get the chromosome testing. Back then, it took almost 3 months before we found out at 3 months old that Stacy had full trisomy 18. We went in and had the testing, and of course, back then, it took over a month to get the testing back. We called and they said, yeah, come on in for the appointment. My husband was an over-the-road trucker at that point. I called him and said he got a load. We had to take him when they could because that was our money. And so he decided to take the load, not knowing really anything that was going on. And when I called them, they said, yeah, the lady at the desk said, yeah, no problem. Just come on in, and not a problem at all. My sister and brother-in-law went with me. My brother-in-law is a psychologist and kind of was figuring that something was going on at that point. And we went in and they gave us a diagnosis of trisomy 18. Had no idea what it was. They couldn't tell us. There was no information. There was no websites because back then there just wasn't this stuff available. So we were kind of left on our own. And the next day, the social worker called my older sister to say, how's your sister doing? Instead of calling me and asking me or whatever, she's calling my sister, who happened to be with me at that point. So, it took a while for them to understand. And they've been told many times now that the way they do things sometimes isn't exactly the right way. Because Dave was on the road, I actually had to call him and catch him someplace because they didn't have cell phones. So life was very different. And I had to catch him at one of the rest stops, which he always called me every night. And I had to tell him then on the phone that Stacy had trisomy 18 and probably wasn't going to live. At that point, he came home. One of our friends went and took our truck and delivered the load. And we went down and picked him up. And Dave had already been through this once. His sister was born with trisomy 21, lived to be 15 years old, and was older than Dave. So he'd kind of been through this before. So when I can say that he was a little more accepting than I would have expected him to be, I think it's because he already had lived that life and he knew what it was like. And of course, back then, kids with trisomy 21 went through some of the same struggles that we do today and continue to go through. But just kind of going on with our story, Stacy, the first 5 years, ate by mouth most of that time. I felt like if I put a tube in, and of course you got to remember I didn't have Facebook and so forth to kind of explain to me what the benefits would have been for that, and not a lot of doctor support. So I kept feeding her and crying and saying, you got to eat or you're going to have to go to the hospital. And I can remember those nights all the time. And it was scary to be able to go through those things. And finally, at 5 years old, I realized that, this is ridiculous. There's got to be a better way. And we decided to put the G-tube in. And that's when Stacy became healthier. There's no doubt in my mind. So when families ask me about the G-tube, I will always tell them that actually she did much better once the G-tube was put in. Those 5 years before, she was in the hospital a lot with aspiration. She didn't gain a lot of weight. She was just a little over 19 pounds at 5 years old. So when she went in to get the G-tube, that was very, very tiny. And she gained 10 pounds the first month after she had the G-tube put in. So after that, Stacy became much healthier. She was out of the hospital a lot. She'd go in occasionally with pneumonias, or we got to the point where we could treat the pneumonias at home. She wasn't on oxygen. She did have tube feedings. And she really did quite well. She went to school when she got to 6 years old. Before that, she was always schooled at home, just because of the chance of her catching something. It was always a dreaded time when anybody got chickenpox in the school, and that was one of our protocols that they called us if somebody got chickenpox, and we were able to pull Stacy out at that point because we knew that it could be life-threatening for her at that point. As she grew, we realized to give her the life she needed to have, we needed to take some chances along the way, and she was proven to us that she was able to do that. So she was going to school. She enjoyed life. She went out with us everywhere. Brother wanted her to come to football games. She went to football games. And in New York, I'm going to tell you, it's not very warm at the football games at this time of year. She didn't know what football was. She didn't really care about the game of football, but she loved seeing her brother. And there was a real bond between her and Andy. He was born about 18 months after Stacy. And basically he just big. I mean, so you got Stacy, who's, 4, 8.5. And I might've switched that around before. And then Andy, who was, over 10 pounds and now happens to be 6'3" and over 250 pounds. So a big guy. But he never, saw her as being frail. He always saw her as his sister. He'd come in and he'd start shaking her up in her wheelchair, and Stacy would just laugh and carry on and just start belly laughing like a lot of our kids with Trisomy 18 do. And she loved every minute she had with Andy. And he included her in everything. She went to baseball games. She went to football games. She went everywhere with us when she was well and healthy. We took extra precautions when we needed to. If people were coming in the house, they weren't allowed in with colds. So we took a lot of those precautions. But we also decided that we needed to give her the life that she needed to. And she enjoyed it. She enjoyed every minute of that. We went to the mall, bought a lot of clothes for the girl, a lot of sneakers, and she was known for her bows, her sneakers, and her outfit matching every time we went anywhere, right up until almost 37 years old. They knew her at Victoria's Secret as she came in to buy her clothes, and that's just the way it was. Everybody knew her at the mall, but they didn't know me. They didn't know Judy. And Judy was our nurse that was with us for probably 30 years of Stacy's life. And we were very fortunate to have her help our family and keep us going and give us the little bit of time that we could have. So Dave and I were allowed to go back to work. Dave gave up the over the road trucking just because it wasn't realistic that, he'd be on the road all the time. And Stacy loved having him home, and he just doted on everything. And again, he'd get down at her face and you could just see him reach down and touch her dad's face because she just loved her dad to no end. So we did everything we could. She went to different schools. There was a lot of fights in the school system. There was a lot of fights with the doctors, not fights, just heavy conversations, I guess I'm going to say. She was the first child to go to BOCES with the G-tube because at that point they were saying she had to have a nurse feed her all the time. And so we were able to convince them that, hey, her cousin is feeding her, who actually is not a nurse and is 11 years old, and she's feeding her at home through a G-tube. So why can't some of the staff at the school learn how to do that? Luckily, her uncle, who was a psychologist, was also the director of special ed at that time. So life was a little bit easier. He also became an assistant superintendent. So getting her into programs was a little bit better because he knew her and he knew what we were experiencing at home. So she went through her whole school life, in and out of the hospital occasionally, but she did better. A lot of orthopedic problems. Stacy had a small PDA in her heart, which never really affected her, although she had a lot of apnea spells at the very early time in her life, and would stop breathing, but came around out of that. And as she grew, those apnea spells seemed to go away a little bit. She was on BiPAP at night, tube feedings, but she was a joy. She was just an absolute joy every day of her life. We got to the point where, as she was getting older, she just loved everything. She loved music, so we ended up taking her to concerts. Toby Keith was her favorite. She loved Toby Keith, so she's a country girl, and we got lots of pictures there at the country concerts and people singing to her. We ended up going on 5 cruises when Stacy was alive. And she absolutely loved and felt like she was the center of attention. The chefs would make mashed potatoes for her. I have to tell you, the first time we were on the first cruise, and actually one of the families from Texas went with us, the Thompsons. So we were really fortunate to have another family with us. Plus we went with another group of families that we knew. And the first time we said, well, all she'll eat is mashed potatoes. They came out with 5 lumps of mashed potatoes. And I'm like, there is no way on earth that this girl is going to eat 5. By the end of the cruise, I was able to get them down to just, enough for her to eat by mouth. Because even though she was G-tube fed, she always had things by mouth too that she liked. And we called it the white food group: mashed potatoes, whipped cream, tapioca pudding, things like that. She only liked things in the white food group. There wasn't too many things she didn't like. But it was also very thin textured things that she liked. So we did get to do the 5 cruises. We really enjoyed that. She went to several American College of Medical Genetics meetings with us, met many doctors. Many of them wouldn't believe us sometimes that she had full trisomy 18, but it was the way to teach them along the way. So she's done everything she could to teach them. And I guess the best way would be is they'd walk into the booth and she'd either be sitting on my lap or she'd be in her wheelchair. And Stacy loved to hold hands with anybody. She didn't care. She saw the good in everybody. She didn't need to be told to be kind like all of us need to be told to be kind sometimes. Stacy would just reach out and touch their hand and just hold their hand. And nobody knew what to do then, because by God, she wasn't going to give it up. I'm going to tell you right then. She held everybody's hand for as long as she could, and she wouldn't give that hand up. So she was able to travel. We had a plan. I mean, it was very hard to plan. We had a list of how we would travel, but she was able to do it. She enjoyed it. She laughed. She had so much time, such a good time. She loved being at soft conferences, and she just was a joy. As she got older, she ended up going from school into a day hab program. Again, one of the first ones in a day hab program with a G-tube, where they actually brought in a one-on-one aid, because then when they get into the years after school, there's no rights or reasons or anything to have in the adult program. So they don't give you one-on-one aids because they don't have that available. And we were able to talk to somebody that we know that was a friend of the Vietnam veterans, who my husband's in the Vietnam veterans. So he was able to help push for an extra budget spot for Stacy to be able to have go and have a one-on-one aid with her and a nurse come in to feed her. So we were very fortunate there. She did really well, but at about the age of 25, she had a twisted bowel. And at that point, we were at that time of being at the children's hospital or being the adult hospital. They hadn't switched us over yet. And basically when we went in, I fought them and said, yeah, well, all our doctors are still in the children's hospital, so it needs to be there. So they did take us through children's ED, but they changed the policy after that and put a limit of 18 years old on it. And so we ended up in the children's hospital, but an adult surgeon had to do the surgery. She made it through the surgery. She did fairly well. But then when she got to the age of 35, about 35. Again, the bag stopped working at that point, so we knew that the ostomy wasn't working, had to take her in for an emergency surgery then. They didn't want to do the surgery and actually said to us, well, you told the other surgeon that you didn't want the surgery done. I said, that's not what I said. What I said was, we're not going to do surgery now when the stoma was okay. It was just out a little bit from where it was supposed to be. We'll do surgery when we have to do surgery, because it's a pretty intense surgery. So at that point, the doctor decided to do the surgery after a little fight, and me saying, let's just take trisomy 18 out of the equation. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at what Stacy's life was about, and the joy that she is to us and always has been. So he did do the surgery, and unfortunately didn't listen enough. And that's what we found out in the adult world is they didn't listen. I tried to let them know that they needed to give her her reflux medication, and that all anesthesiologists had said that was a major thing before she went in for surgery. They didn't do it, and unfortunately she aspirated, had to have a bronchoscopy, and ended up later and came back with an ET tube. And it's the only time in all the surgeries that she's had that she ever had to come back off on a ventilator. And unfortunately, they ended up having a trach her before we got home, and we were in the hospital for almost 7 weeks. And that was probably something that somebody could have helped prevent a little bit. We don't know that, but it definitely wasn't the route we wanted to go. We thought the trach was going to be short term, but it didn't end up being that she could get off it right away. And those last 2 years of her life were a little more complicated, and she was a little sicker, and we had an emergency room in our home, basically. And going through the adult care system has been a nightmare. I still sit on several committees. We sat down with a hospital administrator after Stacy passed, after about 2.5 months. And he actually happened to be one of our doctors one of the times, because he's a pulmonologist. And we sat down with him for 2.5 hours and told him what went wrong every time we went in the hospital with her in the adult units. And then unfortunately COVID hit, so that doesn't help anything, although he still knows that we're out there and we're not going to let it drop. Not that we're saying that anybody did anything wrong or whatever. We're just saying they could have done a better job. And she probably ended up with a plug in the trach because somebody didn't listen to us towards the end. We had to make the decision, and it was a decision we never wanted to have to make. But she ended up, like I said, having to have CPR, and we had to make the decision. And Dave had just gone home to sleep, because we always switched off at the hospital. We never left her alone. And Dave went home. And I called him, and I was screaming into the answering machine, because he wasn't answering his phone. He finally answered, and I told him what was going on. He was on his way back immediately. But we both decided at that point, she was tired. She'd been in and out of the hospital about every 3 weeks at that point for about probably 5 or 6 months. She just wasn't as happy, and she slept a lot, and we decided that we just didn't want this. We didn't want them to continue doing CPR. It had already been 20 minutes, 25 minutes at that point. So we asked them to stop. At that point, they said, okay, we're just going to clean her up. But at that point, she had been filled with adrenaline and so forth, and everything else to keep her alive, was holding my hand and so forth. But because of some of the laws here in New York State, unfortunately, even though we said we did not want her put back on a ventilator, they had to put her back on a ventilator, because here in New York State, the department, the Developmental Disability Service Office has to make a decision if you're making the correct decision for your child when they're in the hospital and they're receiving services from them. So it was a terrible part of our life. It was terrible to make the decision, but then to sit there and have to see that they put her back on a ventilator when we knew that wasn't what she wanted at that point. We could see it in her eyes, but it did give us the opportunity to bring in her brother. Her niece, who at 2.5 years old, loves her dearly and still talks about her. She's 5 years old now, but she remembers Aunt Stacy and keeps her alive in our heart all the time. And then all our nurses except one were able to get in there. And pulled some strings along the way just because I work in the system, and made it that because it was a weekend, of course, everything happens on a weekend. And they said that they weren't able to do anything until Monday morning at 9 o'clock when the office opened. But he agreed with taking the ventilator off. And I said there was no way that I was going to wait from Saturday morning until Monday morning. So we ended up with my boss calling the head of the DDSO, the head of the state, and they got everything ready. And the doctors that I knew in the hospital and sitting on the different committees were able to make the call, get everything done, and we were able to take her off the vent. And she passed within 10 minutes with everybody holding her hand, playing songs because she loved music so much. And she just looked peaceful at that point. And we knew that it was a decision we had to make, but it was a decision we never wanted to have to make. And it has been very difficult, living almost 37 years with somebody and taking care of them. David retired at that point to take care of her 4 hours a day, because we were able to do that in New York. After they're 21 years old, you can do some of the care yourself and get paid. So he had retired to do that. Retired, I mean, he was 70 years old. He deserved to retire. But everything was just, very difficult. We came home to an empty house. Our son's married. So we came home to a very different circumstance than what we were used to for so many years. We were used to the nurses being in our house. We were used to supply companies coming in. We were used to going to the doctors all the time. We were used to sending her to day program or to school for all that time, or having therapies. So our life changed immensely after that. And it was very, very difficult. It still is. I'm not going to say that it isn't. I feel sometimes like, we're moving on to a certain point, but it's hard not to be stuck sometimes. And I think people think sometimes I'm stuck just because I want to hear her name. I want to post things and I want to feel comfortable about that. That does not mean I'm stuck where I am. It just means that I want to remember my child just like they're able to remember their child or talk about their child. So I just want her name mentioned once in a while. So I think sometimes then people are like, oh, I'm sorry. And carrying on like, oh my gosh, you probably need some more help, Barb. But it's not that. I just want her to be remembered. So if I post a picture once a week or whatever, if I post a picture once a month, I'm there because I want somebody to remember her. I want everybody to remember her because she was a big part of our life. And she did a lot of good in our world. And she provided a lot of joy to our family and a lot of other people around the area. We're taking our time making decisions. At first, we brought her home, just her ashes, and after a year, we decided to go ahead and bury her. And I have to help convince Dave to some of these things because it's very hard for him to go for change. So he spends some time with her at the cemetery, probably a couple times a week, watering the flowers and so forth. And our gravestone happens to be an actual bench with her picture on it, just because then we can go sit with her. And one weekend we went up and there was a little Lego there, and I said, where'd the Lego come from? And Andrea, our granddaughter, came over. She goes, I went to see Aunt Stacy at the cemetery and I left her a pretty red Lego. So we knew where the Lego came from after that. And having her around, she'll see a star in the sky and she'll say, look, there's Aunt Stacy up there. So she has been our saving grace since we lost Stacy. Not to say that she's replaced her, because she certainly hasn't, but she's helped us keep her memory alive. And that's been very important to us. So that's kind of our story. 37 years, very quick.
Thank you so much, Barb. That was amazing. Just like you said, 37 years, very, very quick. We thank you and we honor Stacy. We say her name. I know we're running past our time. However, we usually do like to open it up in case there are questions. I know we have a few other people on Thank you, sweetie. We have a few other people here on Zoom, and I haven't looked at our Facebook, but I can check that to see if there are any comments or questions. But just want to give at least a few minutes if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, or you know, say something to our panelists, or if you have anything that you want to share before we officially wrap it up, we'll let you do that. And I don't even know if I can access the Facebook portion. So if there's a comment or question there, maybe we'll have to come back after the fact. But okay, thank you all so very much for your time. Thank you to the panelists. I know we have many people in our community who could have shared stories. Many have touched my heart, and there are many that I don't even know about. But we just wanted to take this time to hear a few of them, and maybe we can do something similar again and hear some other stories. And so thanks again for your time, and we will share this as we get the recording up. But meanwhile, I think you can access it from the Facebook page. So those of you who shared, if you want to share it with your circles, I think you can share it from the Trisomy Talk page as well. We have a comment, written comment. Someone else says, thank you to everyone for sharing your stories. So thank you all, and have a wonderful night.